Okay, welcome everybody. We're not starting quite yet. We're about 1 minute ahead of schedule, and we will be starting exactly on time. So I'm going to wait about 45 seconds until we're at the 12:30 Central Time mark or 1:30 Eastern Time mark. And once we're directly on that mark, we're going to begin. And then I will also commit to you that we will end exactly on time as well. So. I'm going to just turn my camera off for a moment, take a secret sip of coffee, and then we'll get started. All right, we're ready to go. Somnath, can I confirm that you're recording this?
Yes, I do.
Excellent. Okay, so welcome to Sell Up in a Down Economy. And I know that we probably will have a few stragglers coming in shortly after the hour. Uh, Out of respect for everybody's time, though, particularly the people who were able to show up exactly on time, I'm going to start exactly on time. And let me introduce myself to all of you. I am Dan Rust. I am the Vice President of Global Leadership and Commercial Development for Infopro Learning. What that essentially means is I have a small team of instructional designers, researchers, trainers, and facilitators who develop content exclusively in the in the leadership space. And then those programs that we develop, these off-the-shelf programs, we have a library of about 65 or 70 off-the-shelf courses. And then we have a global team of facilitators who deliver those courses to clients around the world. And I'll give you a little more detail about that in a moment. I'm also the host of the Leadership Disrupted podcast, which is available on Spotify and YouTube and anywhere your finest podcasts are can be found. Also the author of Workplace Poker. And if you are interested in learning more or connecting with me, you can just scan this QR code and it'll take you to my contact information. And you're certainly welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn or however you might want to, if that's something that you want to do. And the reason I shared this information with you is because almost every day I have conversations with employees and leaders in the real world of work. While InfoPro Learning is in fact a training vendor and we are selling training services, I'm talking to real people every day, and I'm really committed to making sure that what we develop is a reflection of what we're seeing in the real world. So, for example, this slide lists our off-the-shelf programs. I've actually got two slides that this is our entire library of content. I can say to you, this library of content is a reflection of customer conversations because we're continuously refreshing, updating, adding, taking away, evolving. And so every one of these programs, I would call a post-pandemic program. Even if we had the program prior to the pandemic, in the last 3 years, 3.5 years, we have refreshed every single program again to reflect the real world of work. And today's content is selected from our program called Sell Up in a Down Economy. And one of the things we know that's happening right now is some organizations are absolutely feeling the pain of a down economy. Some organizations are just beginning to feel the pain. It's maybe more of an ache, maybe not quite as sharp of a pain. And some organizations aren't really feeling it yet, but they're hearing about it or hearing that their customers might be feeling it. So wherever you are on that spectrum of experiencing a down economy, this program is actually designed to help your sales reps and your sales managers understand where they are, understand what their customers are going through. And I've got an information sheet here on this specific program. It's designed as a 2-day workshop. It's 2 full days of content. Not that we would expect many organizations to actually go through 2 full days of content, but generally when we're building out a program, we don't start with the constraint of time. We start with the objective and we build out the program to align with the objective. And then sometimes we end up with 1 day, 2 days, sometimes longer programs, but then we have to build them flexibly because the vast majority of our clients do not have the time for a 2-day offsite training. They don't even have the time for a one-day offsite training. So when we deliver these programs virtually, we will curate the content and perhaps curate it down to a 2-hour event for one client, a 4-hour or 6 hours of training for another. But when we're delivering virtual training, we never deliver 6 hours at a time. We'll chop it up into 90-minute to 2-hour segments to be delivered over a series of weeks. So my intent in sharing that with you isn't to sell you the program or sell you on the program. It's just to give you a bit of background and context related to the program, and everything that you're going to be experiencing here in the next 55 minutes is sampled from that program, Sell Up in a Down Economy, from that full program. So I start with this question: what drives the decisions of our customers? And the reason I like to start with this question is because, first of all, I use an example. Some of you are hopefully of a level of maturity or age where you remember back to the Pepsi and Coke taste test commercials. There was a time in the 70s, 80s, 90s, even early 2000s when there were these blind taste tests that were held in shopping malls across the country, and they would ask people in a blind taste test, hey, taste this dark, cold, sugary cola and taste this dark, cold, sugary cola. Which do you prefer? And what was fascinating to me was that consistently, whether these were done in the US or the UK or Singapore or other parts of Asia or India, the results were very, very consistent with only small differences in the percentages. When there was no branding, 70% of individuals in the blind taste test would prefer the taste of Pepsi. When the experiment was repeated where there was branding, it would shift and 70% would prefer the taste of Coca-Cola. Something about the Coca-Cola branding didn't just drive a preference, it actually drove a sense of how something tastes, a sense of what taste people preferred. And I'm not saying this explains everything about what drives the decisions of our customers, but I think it is important to acknowledge that the decisions of our customers are not always driven by pure logic, are not always driven by pure facts. They're driven by a wide variety of factors, including branding. Your brand can add to or can detract from the perceived value of your product or service. So again, this isn't a branding course, but it is a course designed to help you think a little more about how do we sell in this challenging economic circumstance. And we just want to start with recognizing that our customer decisions, they're not as simple as the best value for the lowest price. I wish it was. If it was as simple as, hey, I want to get the best value for the lowest price, it's actually closer to the greatest perceived value for the lowest perceived cost. That might be closer to what drives the decisions of our customers, but there's a lot of magic within that word perceived. There's a lot of subtlety and nuance. So that's my first question. And normally, if we were delivering an actual workshop where we could have lots of interplay, that one question generally elicits a fair amount of conversation with salespeople. And my next question is related to what drives the decisions of our customers. It's around another set of experiments that was done in universities, and it's been repeated year after year. And visualize this. A person is in a room, and or a group of people are in a room, and someone enters the room with a plate of chocolates, a platter of chocolates. And the person goes around to each person sitting at the table, and the chocolates are in a small paper wrapper. The person, the waiter, the steward, whatever name you would use, they select a chocolate and they hand a chocolate to each individual. And then they ask, so each individual has had a chocolate handed to them, and they are asked to rate the taste of the chocolate, to take a taste and rate the taste on a scale of 1 to 10. Very simple. In a separate room, the experiment plays out in exactly the same way, except that the person entering with the platter of chocolates simply leans over and asks each person to select a chocolate from the platter. So the only difference is that in room B, people got to pick a chocolate on their own. In room A, the chocolate was selected for them. The chocolates, they come in a variety of decorations, so that they look slightly different, but they're all made from exactly the same chocolate, so they all taste exactly the same. Consistently, the individuals who are allowed to select their own chocolate rate the taste of the chocolate, at least on a scale of 1 to 10, 2 points higher, 20% higher than the individuals who had a chocolate selected for them. And again, normally if this was a workshop, I would prompt this with a question where we would discuss, how can that happen? How can just the act of me making a choice affect my perception of taste? And of course, the answers that come through, from people attending the workshop are answers like, well, we all tend to validate ourselves. We all tend to, when we can make a choice ourselves, we tend to reinforce our own decision making. Generally, again, there's a fair amount of back and forth with salespeople attending the workshop. But ultimately, what this experiment does is it validates the desire most of us have to make our own choices. We don't want chocolates chosen for us. We want to choose our own chocolates, so to speak. And I mean chocolates metaphorically. And I think it's important as salespeople when we are calling on customers. And of course, our job is to some degree to advocate for our products, our services, our solutions. And we do want to advocate for them, but we also want to create an environment where it's the customer choosing our chocolates, not us pushing a platter of chocolates in front of the customer. And in an environment of a weakening economy, this is even more important because in a weakening economy, when customer buying behaviors start to shift and change, the moment a customer feels that you're pushing toward them, their instinct is to pull away because they're just more cautious than they have been in the past. And one of the things I notice with salespeople when the economy begins to soften, um, many salespeople, and I don't mean this disrespectfully at all, but many salespeople get into a certain selling pattern where they have certain kinds of conversations, they ask certain kinds of questions, they present their product features and benefits in a certain way, and they get into a kind of a pattern, a show, a cadence of presenting. And because it's working, if it's not broke, why fix it? But then what starts to happen is as the economy softens, sometimes that cadence isn't working the way it used to. But because salespeople may find themselves on autopilot, they may not realize that they could benefit from trying something new, trying something different, adjusting their language, adjusting their approach, adjusting their sales process, adjusting their selling cycle, adjusting how they communicate or the actual products and services themselves. But I think most of us, if we're going to be honest with ourselves, we can recognize our tendency to go on auto drive, autopilot. And when the economy starts to weaken, that's the time to turn off the autopilot and to question everything that you've been doing and rethink everything that we've been doing because your customers are being rewired. They're being rewired by the economy to think of it differently. And if the customers are thinking differently, if they're buying differently, we as salespeople need to align with those people who are making those decisions. So then that leads us to the next question. How are the buying patterns changing in a down economy? And this is one where I really do wish we were sitting in a room together or in an actual virtual environment because where we could exchange thoughts back and forth because I'd love to hear from you. How are your customers' buying patterns shifting or changing? What are you seeing? What are you starting to perceive? And in particular, I love to hear the non-intuitive changes in buying patterns because it's not as simple as, well, they're buying less. Yeah, okay, that may be true. And in fact, that's almost certainly true in some cases, but it's not true in all cases. There are certain segments of customers who shift their buying pattern toward choosing micro luxuries. in order to, again, they still want to feel good about themselves. They want to feel good about their lives. They want to feel good about what they're doing. And so in some cases with some product lines, there is a shift toward customers spending less, but still spending it on what might be called micro luxuries. Or some customers want to stay with their chosen brand, but they may shift down one or two notches. So again, spending less money, but staying loyal to their perceived luxury brand or the perceived value of their particular brand. And so our buying patterns, I can't say to you there's one single buying pattern shift. What I can say is in all of your businesses, as your customers start to feel the pinch, their buying pattern starts to change. For some customers, it's we're just going to stop. We're no longer going to be spending money on X, whatever X is. For a lot of others, it's we're going to delay, we're going to pause, we're going to rethink, we're going to try get the same solutions we were getting before, but try get them differently or get them for less. Particularly business to business customers, they're all driven by their own need to try to drive the growth of their business. But I think it is important for salespeople to pause and think, how is the buying pattern changing? I had a situation with a client who was responding because after April of this year, their month-to-month sales dropped by about 20, almost 25%. And they were instinctively deciding, oh, we need to move toward discounting. Our customers are very price sensitive now, and let's move toward discounting. And that was, but that urge to move toward discounting, it actually reflected, I'm going to go back on my slides, it reflected them being on autopilot because in previous situations, in previous downturns, they had used discounting as a way to boost sales. But as we kind of got under the hood to try to understand how is the buying pattern actually changing, what they found was that customers were not going to the market and buying cheaper options. They were delaying, and they weren't delaying in order to buy cheaper. They were delaying because times are uncertain right now. They wanted to wait until they got a bit more certainty about what was going to be happening in the next 6 months, in the next 9 months. And so if you've got a customer who's delaying, and no matter you could drop the price by 50%, and they're not going to spend 50% right now. If you think you're going to move a customer who's intent on delaying because they don't have to buy now, they can delay for 6 months, and they would like to wait until there's certainty, you're going to have to discount very deeply in order to move them off of that dime. Whereas if you can align with their selling, if their buying cycle, if you can align with their pattern, or at least analyze why it is that they're delaying, you can align your selling approach with their current buying approach. Hopefully that makes sense. And what we can also do is at least stop for a moment to think, is there a way for us to evolve some of our products, some of our solutions to align with the new buying patterns? So again, each of you has different businesses, so I don't want to throw out solutions or ideas that would just feel like they don't quite fit your scenario or your business. But are there ways for you to adjust your products, to adjust your services, to make them more relevant to the existing environment? So one example of that, of course, the one that comes immediately to mind for us is when we started to get like early indications that the economy would be softening this year. One of the things that we did, I'm going to go back up here, we decided to develop a couple of new training programs, one called Sell Up in a Down Economy, which you're getting a bit of a taste of right now, and one called Lead Up in a Down Economy that is more about how does a leader lead in an environment where employees are a bit more cynical, employees are a little bit more paranoid, all of the things that come along with a challenging economy, particularly if your organization is having to make some tough calls for layoffs. How do you lead the layoff survivors, so to speak? So we decided to develop some content that would be relevant to today's world. And we also made some adjustments to our invoicing process, made some adjustments to our pricing, not really in discounting, but some other adjustments to add flexibility, all to align with what we felt was happening with our customers. So it's a good question to ask, and I would say the people to ask this question of, because many of you on this call may not be directly in sales, you may be sales leaders, sales managers. But what I would do is I would go to your direct salespeople who have the most direct contact with their customers and ask them what's happening with the customers. What decisions are they making or not making? Why are they making those decisions? Why are they not making those decisions? And generally, it is your direct one-to-one salespeople who have the best sense of what is the customer's new behavior, what's driving that behavior, and then that can lead you to, well, perhaps we can evolve one or more of our products. Perhaps we can make adjustments to some of our solutions, whatever those adjustments might be. Again, I would just avoid autopilot. I would just recognize that we are in a very unique situation with a softening economy, with a world of information overwhelm, where customers and salespeople are being flooded with information 7/24 on their computers, on their smartphones, information media, social media, news media, commercial media. So we've got people who are cognitively overloaded with information. We have generational challenges. We have challenges with different values, different cultures. We have technology challenges. We have AI and other technology challenges. So the economic softening that we are experiencing today is likely to drive noticeably different behaviors than, say, if you look to 2008, during the financial crisis of 2008, or if you go back another decade or two. You can look at the behaviors that occurred then, and the behavior shifts that you'll see now may be similar in some ways, but I would just recommend you pay really close attention to what your customers are doing, why they're doing it, and in particular, if you have some close friends who happen to be customers of your organization or happen to be buyers of your products or services, that's a great thing to have, because you can reach out to them and talk to them very openly and transparently about how they're thinking about and how their buying patterns are changing. So with that, I'm going to pause for a moment. I don't know if that prompts any thoughts or questions from anybody. I know I just covered a lot in about 20 minutes. And this would normally in a workshop, be a couple of hours of conversation about these topics. But I just want to give you food for thought. And I am now going to move into kind of a new segment for this webinar. We're going to focus a bit on fundamentals, because one of the things that I'm finding is that when you have salespeople on autopilot, sometimes they lose the fundamentals, or they lose some of the fundamentals. And there does come a point where you can start to pay a price for that when things are shifting in the marketplace. So one of the most fundamentals is knowing your typical selling cycle. So what I mean by selling cycle is the series of progressive events that typically lead to a sale. And these progressive events, each of those events tends to be something that requires some progressive action or commitment on the part of the customer. So it's not just a series of meetings. It's not just a series of get acquainted sessions. A selling cycle is a predictable series of events. And for every business, for every product, for every market, the selling cycles tend to be unique. But it's important to understand that it's more than just a series of visits. If I have a sales rep who has visited a particular client 4 times, that almost tells me nothing until I understand, well, what actually happened during those visits. What kinds of questions were asked? What kinds of needs were identified? What kinds of commitments did the customer make? What kinds of progressive actions did the customer take? What did they agree to do to progress things forward? If all they're doing is agreeing to meet again next quarter, yeah, let's just meet again next quarter. Let's touch base. Let's check in. To me, that's not really progressing the selling cycle. The selling cycle needs to be a series of progressive events. And if you get your head around that concept of a series of progressive events, Then that leads you to the concept of an advancement objective. And what we mean by an advancement objective is a salesperson is preparing for a call. It might be a virtual call, it might be a live face-to-face call, but as they're getting their mindset together for a call, if the salesperson thinks through where they are in their selling cycle, then they should be able to answer this question. What's the most likely advancement objective that will come out of this next meeting if you are managing to progress the selling cycle? Will they, commit to a demonstration? Will they commit to attending a conference? Will they commit to a pilot? Will they commit to a first purchase order? Will they commit to, what might they commit to? What action might they take? Might they commit to a follow-up meeting where they invite their boss or they invite their team? Anything that requires some degree of action or commitment on the part of the customer that advances the selling cycle. Now, salespeople will often tell you after the event, okay, I'm coming off of the meeting, they will tell you, well, this is what we achieved, or this is the next step. This is where it's going. But where many salespeople get uncomfortable is when you ask them in advance, what are you planning for advancement? Given your understanding of your typical selling cycle, given your understanding of where you are right now with this client, what's the most likely organic next step if things are going well, if things are advancing? And our concept is that you plan your advancement objective in advance before the sales call. Now, that does mean you might not make it. You might go into the sales call saying, look, I know that she's not the final budget making decision maker. And a great advancement objective for this call would be for her to agree to a follow-up meeting with her and the budget holder, or to introduce me to the budget holder. Now, I may go into that call and I may or may not achieve that advancement objective. I may end up achieving a different advancement objective. The concept of planning your advancement objective in advance is actually uncomfortable for some salespeople. But at the same time, we find that if they're willing to document or at least decide what their advancement objective is in advance of a sales call, they are much more likely to achieve that objective or another advancement objective, as opposed to going into the sales call saying, well, I don't know a lot about the situation, so my goal is to just identify needs, or find out if there are some needs, or see what the level of interest is. Gathering information, that's a good thing to do. Gathering information, building relationship, those are all good things. I'm not saying they shouldn't be done. What I'm saying is, in addition to all of those things, every sales call should have a predetermined advancement objective that, if achieved, will move the selling cycle a step forward. So there are things that are not advancement objectives. They're important. Gathering information is important, but it's not an advancement objective. You don't go into a sales call saying, my sole goal is to gather information. It may be to gather information and achieve the next natural step in the selling cycle, whatever that might be. It may be, I may go in saying, yes, I want to build the relationship. I want to enhance the relationship, enhance the level of trust with this person, the rapport with this person. Of course, yes, those are good, but they are not advancement objectives because they do not require action or commitment on the part of the customer. So, and I know this is for some of you probably very fundamental, but it's been interesting to me to see that some fairly experienced salespeople get a little uncomfortable with this concept when their feet are held to the fire, and they may have lost sight of even such a basic fundamental concept. And this leads us to this thought, which is the optimal selling process, like what you do when you're face to face with the customer, that selling process, and also the cycle of events, it should align with your customer's buying process. And so in a down economy, in a softening economy, it makes sense that your selling cycle would evolve. The timelines might evolve. The timelines might stretch out. You might have more events. One of the trends we're seeing is in a situation where in years past, an individual would hold a budget and an individual would be able to pull the trigger on a certain level of commitment. We're finding that those individuals are now adding to the selling cycle by adding follow-up meetings where they bring in teams of people, where suddenly it's not just one person holding a budget, but a team of people holding a budget, a team of people making a mutual or joint decision, which may, again, expand or lengthen your selling cycle. And it's important that if you're paying attention to the behavior of your customers, that you will align your planning, you align your documentation with however your particular selling cycle has evolved. So let me give you an example of a typical business to business selling cycle, or what I mean by a selling cycle. A selling cycle starts by gaining access, and what I mean by access is conversation. Somebody agrees to, yeah, I'll talk with you. Now they may agree because they received an email. They may agree because they visited a website and they fill out a form and they agree to a meeting. Many organizations have a particular group of people who are lead generators, and those lead generators are their prospectors who are, reaching out, making the outbound calls, doing the outbound emailing, doing the outbound marketing activity, all designed to get individual humans to raise their hand to say, yeah, I'd be interested in an initial conversation. Now, in order to get to that one individual who says, yeah, I might be interested in finding out more, you might have to churn through 10, 20, 30, or 50 or more people who are just saying, no, 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 no. And then you get your one yes. In many business to business selling environments, their face-to-face salespeople don't experience those no's anymore because that's being done either by marketing or by inside sales or by the lead generation team. There are still some salespeople who do it all, who prospect, who create the initial lead, and then they take that lead and they turn it into an opportunity and then into business. But that's becoming more and more rare. Where for most salespeople, the selling cycle starts is what we call pre-opportunity engagement. It means a specific opportunity has not been identified yet, but the client has agreed to talk to you. The client has agreed to have a conversation in one way, shape, or form. There comes a point that now that may be one conversation, it may be a series of conversations, but there comes a point where the client says, as I think about this, we probably should consider X, whatever X. And here's what our challenges are. Here's what we're trying to accomplish. And that's when an opportunity begins to bubble up. And the salesperson says, aha, now I've got something I can latch my solutions onto. And that opportunity engagement, it's a part of the selling cycle, but it's distinct from the pre-opportunity engagement because when a client has not yet said, hey, I have a problem and I'd be interested in some help having that problem solved, you have to be very cautious about the way you come forward, the way you share, the way you advocate. Go back to the example of pushing the plate of chocolates in front of the customer. When a customer has not said, yeah, I could really use a chocolate, or I really I'm feeling I'm feeling a sweet tooth right now. When the client has actually said, I'm open to talking to you, but I'm not necessarily looking for anything in particular. You want to be very cautious about how you approach, because if you push too hard, if you push the plate of chocolates at them too soon, the natural inclination is going to be to push back, to draw back. And so what you see here is, again, a typical business to business selling cycle. There's the gaining access, where the customer raises his hand and says, yeah, I'm willing to talk. There's the pre-opportunity engagement where, yeah, I'll talk with you. I'd like to learn a little bit more about you. Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about me. And then at a certain point, a need gets identified, a need bubbles up, and now we've got something to latch onto. And then hopefully we eventually close. Now, while that's occurring, between the pre-opportunity engagement and the opportunity engagement, there are a number of things happening. There's dialogue and discovery, what some people will call needs analysis. And that happens from the very beginning, even the pre-opportunity engagement. The customer hasn't really said what their problem is, or that they have a problem, or that they have a need. But hopefully we're really good at having conversations, asking open-ended questions, leading toward the customer opening up, building rapport with them so that they're more and more comfortable opening up to us. And also, hopefully we're good at guiding the questions and guiding the conversation, and then even potentially creating value from the very beginning. If there's a way to create value before the customer buys something from you, if you can create value for them by sharing your insights, by sharing your thoughts, by sharing information, or by sharing resources, creating value before there's an actual opportunity, before there's an actual deal. Those three things occur throughout the selling cycle, to some degree or a lesser degree, again, depending upon the business and depending upon the expertise of the salesperson. Um, Prior to working for Infopro Learning, I worked for General Electric for almost a decade as a commercial learning leader. I spent a lot of time in the field traveling with the best of the best GE sales reps who were selling um, multi-million dollar deals, engineering deals, manufacturing deals, technology deals. And the best of them found ways to create value for those clients from the get-go, where the clients looked forward to the next meeting, to the next conversation, to the next whatever, because every conversation was a value creation conversation where they may take away an idea, they may take away an insight, they may take away something that for the sales rep leads to the next appointment, leads to the next engagement, whatever that might be. Now, if we assume that we close and we win whatever the deal is, there's a transition period. Paperwork has to be filled out, contracts have to be created. And then there's a point where we move into delivery. And oftentimes the sales representatives aren't necessarily involved in the delivery. They may be on the periphery. In some businesses, they're heavily involved because they take on the client service as well as the sale. In other businesses, that's handled by a separate group of people. But how this selling cycle works oftentimes is we deliver, and let's assume we deliver with excellence, and then we stay within this cycle where by delivering with excellence, we stay connected with these customers and we get more business from these customers. And this is a great selling cycle, particularly during good times. But I'm going to back up for a second. So if this selling cycle, or in your mind, some version of this makes sense for you, this often becomes, and I'm going to go back to here, this often becomes part of our autopilot, where this is just the engine that's churning, the engine that's working. And I'm not saying that that's bad, but we get caught up in this engine that works, and then suddenly the economy softens, and this engine doesn't produce what it used to produce. Because even though the customers like us, even though they like what we've delivered, they're pausing. They're not as ready. Budgets are tighter than they used to be. And so then this engine begins to produce less of a result, and we start to struggle. We start to get frustrated. So let me then, if you can stay with this thought for a moment, what's really happened is this gaining access function that used to produce a certain level of result when the ocean was filled with the fishes, lots of fish in the ocean. So however we are prospecting for new leads, whether it's a separate team of people, whether it's our own salespeople, whatever it might be, we have this process for gaining access, and there were a lot of fish in the ocean. Now the ocean is starting to shift and there are fewer fish, and the fish are probably smaller and they're more skittish. So if you just keep fishing in the ocean with the same number of lines or the same size of net, basically, if your fishing doesn't change, you, of course, are not going to do as well as you were doing when there were more fish in the ocean. So something's got to change in terms of what you're doing, or you're going to go hungry, or your family's going to go hungry, so to speak. So let's dive into this gaining access. Now, I'm thinking, because many of your organizations operate with a model somewhat similar to this, what that means is your face-to-face salespeople don't do a lot of raw prospecting, what some people used to call smiling and dialing, picking up the phone, reaching out to people, trying to gain access, trying to get customers to raise their hand and say, yeah, I'd be willing to have a conversation with you. And I have a particular thought regarding that. And here is how I'd like to share that thought. If we took all of the current fish that are in the sea And we divided them into three groups of potential customers. And we have group number one, where those fish, so to speak, are saying, actually, I am kind of looking. I'm looking for a few options for whatever your product or service might be. Yeah, I'm actively in the search. Then you have this group number two where they're saying, I've not really been thinking about this, and in fact, we've kind of put things on hold, but I probably should. I probably should be thinking about it, even though we've kind of put things on hold. And then you have group number three where that person says, look, I am perfectly satisfied with our current approach, with our current partners, with our current solutions. Don't bother me. Life is good. And if I were to ask you, where is your incremental growth potential, your new growth potential within these three groups? If you could, we'll see how engaged you folks are. Just put into the chat 1, 2, or 3. Just vote 1, 2, or 3. Would you see your greatest incremental new growth potential as number 1, number 2, number 3? There's no right or wrong answer. It's more. I guess to be honest, I think there's a more right answer, but we'll get to that in a second. Any thoughts? Anybody willing to put in a 1 or a 2 or a 3 into the chat? And I don't see any 1s, 2s, or 3s. So here's my thesis. My thesis is, I'm going to go back. We're already doing good with number 1. Now there are fewer ones. There are fewer ones in the sea, but we already do pretty good with them. There are fewer number 2s, but we already do pretty good with them. These are the folks who, in fact, they might need to be sold a little bit. And we instinctively avoid the number 3s. Oh, salespeople hate the number 3s. I hate the number 3s. I hate it when someone says, do not bother me, you're drawing flies. And yet, I think there is, in fact, great potential in those number 3s. The person who currently says, I got no reason to talk to you. Yeah, I haven't. Now, I'm going to say, I'm assuming this number 3 is a fish in the ocean. That means they have a latent need for our product. If this person was just a random person out there who has no underlying or dormant need for our product or service, of course, let them go. Absolutely let them go. What I'm saying is this is someone who, underneath it all, as you peel the layers away, there's a need, but it's not a perceived need. In fact, they've got lots of perceived lack of need. And if we can develop the ability to crack the code on this person, it's going to make it that much easier on 1 and 2. Now, 1 and 2, we're already doing pretty well with, but I like to say to salespeople as part of this workshop, when we're delivering the full workshop, let's focus in on the most difficult prospects, the prospect where you know that if only I could get them to listen, if only I could get them to pay attention for 15 or 20 minutes. If only I could get my foot in the door with them just a bit. Once I get my foot in the door, I know I can get to the next step. I know I can get to the next step after that, but I can't even get a foot in the door with those people. So we're going to take some time focusing in on how do we get a foot in the door with folks like this. So, but what makes this uncomfortable is this introduces a whole new element to our selling cycle, because what we're saying is, this person is not someone we've already delivered to. This is not somebody that we've already got a relationship with. This is not somebody who's already experienced our value. This is a new decision maker with a new budget. And we now, as a salesperson, we're going to try to gain access to this hyper resistant person. And so how do we do that? Well, we have to acknowledge a couple things. When we first introduce ourselves, if we manage to get even on a call, or honestly, even if we send an email to this person, how many of you have this experience now where almost every day you receive LinkedIn messages from people who are selling you things, and they send you these 2 or 3 paragraph messages? What I find myself doing is I see that I've got a LinkedIn message, I open it up, and I quickly scan to the last couple of words, which will tell me, oh, they're selling something. And I think of those messages like this. I don't even know exactly what they say. When you first introduce yourself to one of these resistant folks, You may say a lot of lovely words. You may have an elevator pitch that is a beautiful elevator pitch. You worked on it. Your company worked on it. Your company has all kinds of wonderful messaging. And the moment you say, "Hey, I'm Greg Jones with OptiValue Corporation," and they hear OptiValue Corporation, and the mind just kind of shuts down. You're saying words. If you've ever listened to one of those Charlie Brown Christmas specials, where the teacher is talking to Charlie Brown, and all that Charlie Brown hears is wah, 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 wah. I think the reality is for most of us, the moment we say, "Hey, here's who I am. I'm the director of sales for some organization," the brain just of the customer, of this resistant customer, kind of shuts down. So we have to work our way through this. But if our messaging is kind of standard sales messaging, let me share with you what makes us unique. We're the biggest, we're the best. We work with Fortune 500 companies. Our products are the best in this way and this way and this way. Um, all of this common stuff, it's not inherently bad. So I'm not trying to be judgy about this. But what this almost immediately does is it just flags you as, oh, this is just another salesperson hawking another product or service. And for this person, it's just painful to have to listen to all of this. And even if they're being polite with you, they just tend to shut down. And I know those of you on this call who are salespeople and are experiencing this, or you have been salespeople, I know you've experienced this. I've experienced this. My mouth is saying the words. I'm doing all the right things, and yet I can see the deadness in their eyes. Like they're not buying what I'm saying or selling. And so we actually have to think about, how do I engage an apathetic person who I know underneath it all potentially has an actual need for my product or service. So it's like when you were younger, if you found someone that you were interested in dating, and you thought, actually, if I could get him or her to go for coffee with me, if we could go for something easy, actually, if they would just spend half an hour with me, I bet we could be great together. But they won't even give me the time of day. It's that kind of scenario or situation. And so what we recommend is that you start with a very quick hook. And I'll give you some examples of hooks here in a moment. But this is before your elevator speech. This is before you get into any details about your product or service, unless you've got something really dramatic, some very dramatic news. Hey, I don't know if you've heard, but our product just saved 3 astronauts on the space shuttle, or something dramatic like that. Yes, you can open with your product or service, but let's start with a hook, and then the hook is the attention grabber. And once you've grabbed their attention, then you move into your elevator speech. And then hopefully that elevator speech moves toward what we call the first date. That's like the first substantive meeting, the first meeting where you're going to actually have some dialogue, some question and answering, some back and forth with that person. But part of the key, even to the elevator speech, is expecting that just because you've delivered a great little elevator speech and saying, "Hey, I was hoping we could get 15 minutes or 20 or 30 minutes to have a conversation about your needs for this," which is basically you're asking for the first date. You should expect that even with the most fantastic elevator speech in the world, the initial answer is going to be no. And it's going to be a polite no, probably, could be rude, but most likely it's a polite no. And the reason is because they haven't really heard it. They've kind of heard it, but they haven't really heard it. And you have to be prepared that when that person says, "Hey, I get it, and that all sounds really interesting. It's just not the right time for us. Call me in 6 months. Call me next quarter. That might be a better time." You have to be fully prepared to deliver what I call elevator speech number two, which is kind of a paraphrased version of your elevator speech. And it has to flow so naturally and so politely from you because you were expecting it. You were expecting that no. And so you're able to say, hey, I totally understand that the timing doesn't really seem right for you right now. But the reason I was hoping we could talk now is because, and then you should have a reason. You should have something to share that gives you a reason for having that conversation now. And fully expect that even if you handle that so beautifully and graciously, you're still going to get a no response. They're going to say, yeah, yeah, okay, that I get it, but no, this just isn't right for us right now, or this isn't the right time. I would suggest that you have a third version of your elevator speech. And again, this is where there's a level of skill in developing three elevator speeches that naturally progress and that don't feel like you're just repeating yourself. Because that nothing is more annoying than saying they say no and then you say yes and they say no and you say yes. No, there has to be a natural flow of this series of three elevator speeches where you introduce new information, you give them a reason why it would make sense to have a conversation now. And part of this workshop is obviously taking the time to have exercises where we actually write out and we build out this series of three progressive elevator speeches so that the pushback may be timing's not right. No, like I said, the timing's not right. Okay, well, yeah, I suppose it couldn't hurt to at least um, gather a little bit of information. So then you've earned your first date. And then what happens on that first date is very important. And we'll get into that in just a bit before we wrap things up. But so in a tough competitive market where your prospects are distracted, where the economy is a bit soft, where they don't think that they need you, you have to put more thought into this door opening process. And so rather than having, I'm going to do this again just because I think it makes sense. Rather than having your sales representatives operate on autopilot, where they're just picking up the phone, they're just reaching out, or they're blasting out email messages, or they're blasting out voicemail messages, or they're creating little quick videos, or they're leaving LinkedIn messages all on autopilot. A lot of that energy is just wasted. In fact, it might actually be harmful because you're operating on old autopilot thinking. And so to summarize, we recommend opening with a strong hook, and I'll give you some examples of hooks in here in a moment. Open with a hook. Transition to an elevator speech where you are prepared for pushback. You're prepared for second pushback. There's an interesting cadence that occurs once you get really comfortable with this kind of elevator speech. Version 1, version 2, version 3. Um, if someone says no the third time, okay, fine, you can let them go. That all right, then it's time to just be polite and let them go. But there's a magic to this cadence of three that oftentimes leads people to finally hear what you're trying to say, finally hear your message. First time they didn't hear it at all. Second time they kind of hear it. Third time when you're saying, look, the last thing I want to do is bug you about this. I just know that based on the research we've been doing about your competitors, many of your competitors are using this approach. And I think it would at least provide some value for you if you understood what they're doing in the marketplace. Okay, yeah, I could find 15 minutes. I could find 20 minutes to have that conversation. So that's the process. Hook, elevator speech, 1, 2, and 3. And then we lead to the first date. And even that first date, the customer's expectations on the first date is, okay, I'll give you 20 minutes to tell me about your content, to tell me about what you're doing. But your structure for the first date is you lead with questions for them. And those questions have to be very carefully crafted so that it feels natural and it feels organic and it doesn't feel like a bait and switch. It doesn't feel like a rug pull where, oh, okay, I agreed to hear your story and now you're asking me questions. So there's a graciousness that has to come with this. But this is our gaining access process. And of course, something like this, where I'm trying to compress it into a webinar, it feels like a lot to cover in a short period of time. But even you and your best salespeople can take this process and develop yourself, build the messaging out yourself. And then what I would encourage you to do is practice it internally, because that's what we do in the workshops. We practice, drill, rehearse, practice until it actually feels so organic, so normal that it's actually quite polite. Now, with that said, I said I would give you some examples of hooks. Here's what we mean by the hook. It's the grabber. A hook can be an internal referral. This is the best possible hook to say, hey, Joe in your operations department, I was just talking to him and he suggested that I give you a call. That's it. That's the hook. I can guarantee you, if I reached out to any one of you and I said someone that you know, or even if you don't know Joe in operations. Now, I'm not saying don't make that up. It has to be real, because it's going to come back to bite you if you say, oh yeah, Karen in procurement suggests that I call you, and then this person finds out Karen in procurement has no idea who I am. So it's got to be real. It's got to be true. But an internal referral, what it does is it stops whatever they were thinking about before, and it at least gets you that 5-10 seconds of engagement. An external referral is also good, second best, but is also good. If you've got any recent or surprising company or industry news, either about you or about them, ideally about them, something that hey, I read about you here, and I've got something that would be relevant to that. So you're bringing something that's interesting or surprising into the conversation immediately. Counterintuitive facts. And what I mean by counterintuitive is it actually doesn't seem like it should be that way, or I would have never thought it would be that way. Competitive facts. They love to hear about their competitors. If you've got some facts, now you can't, again, I have to be cautious. If you are dealing with their competitors and you've gained some proprietary information based upon your business with their competitors, you can't reveal that proprietary information as a hook. But if you've got publicly available information regarding their competitors, I think it is very, very hookish to be able to open with that kind of information. So my point in all of this is think through, how can you hook them? And with every individual prospect, there probably are going to be different hooks that will work for them. But this is what we mean by hooking before you get to the elevator speech. And as I said at the beginning, we're going to commit to starting and ending on time. So I want to give you just one example of an elevator speech. But I know you all get this. I mean, elevator speeching it's sales 101. But the one, I think, unique element I can share with you is that the best information, I'll give you an example here. Here's a quick example of a hook. Jack Summers, your VP of operations, suggested I reach out to you. I was hoping to just get a moment of your time. That's it. That's a hook. And assuming the person just says, well, what can I do for you? It might lead to an elevator speech like this. We work with organizations like yours to help them drive growth and innovation by boosting employee talent in critical areas like AI. And we increase engagement and retention of your most value-creating employees, the ones that you really don't want to lose. That's an elevator speech. I was hoping we could get maybe 20 minutes to talk about this in great detail, to talk about this in more detail. Now, following the rules that I just laid out, I need to expect that even though that's a beautiful elevator speech, the answer is going to be, you know what, that's interesting, time isn't really right. Give me a call in 6 months, or give me a call next quarter, or give me a call whenever, but just not right now. And I need to be prepared to come back to him with a version number 2 and then a version number 3. And this is where I will leave you today. The natural response to a great elevator speech should be, well, how do you do that? Because the elevator speech should have no information about your how. It should not explain how you do anything. It should just be the benefits that you produce. Because if all I do is say, we create these benefits and these benefits and these benefits, the natural question, because it feels like, wow, you're making some pretty bold claims there, they might ask, well, how do you do that exactly? And my answer to that question is, that's exactly what I was hoping to talk to you about. Do you have about 20 minutes? or do you have about 30 minutes? So if I can get that if I can get that magical response was, well, how do you do that? Or sometimes a version of that is, well, who do you do that for? Or who do you work with to do that? Or what are some of the clients in this industry that you work with? That's equally good, because I'm not going to just say, well, we work with A, B, and C. I'm going to say, well, that's what I was part of what I was hoping to talk to you about. Can we get about 20 minutes on your calendar? So I'm not going to give away my how until we have a chance to get a commitment to 20 or 30 minutes. Going back to the advancement objective, my advancement objective was to get the 20 or 30 minutes. And then my final thought is, once I get my 20 to 30 minutes, he's expecting that I'm going to immediately answer those questions, who I work with or how we do it. Okay, and that's a fair expectation, but that's not how I'm going to start. I'm going to start with, I've learned a lot about your organization as I've done research just to get to this point. But I'd be really intrigued. Could you share with me? And then I want to make sure that I ask a thought-provoking question, something that's really engaging, because my strategy is I'm going to spend most of my 20 minutes gathering information, taking information in, and then maybe the last third, I'm going to transition into telling my story. But I'm very strategic in terms of taking my 20 minutes, using 3/4 of it to gather information, and only using 1/4 of it to give information, which then naturally leads to my next advancement objective is, we need more time to go into this in more detail. Can we book another appointment in your calendar? So I need to have made sure that I grab them enough to get my next appointment and then my next appointment. So that's it. I'm going to stop now because that's what I promised to do. Thank you all so much. This is fantastic to have you engaged during all this time. And perhaps we will talk again soon. I know Somnath will be following up with some follow-up information as
Yes.
well for this. So
Yes,
thanks, everybody.
yes. Thank you, everyone. Please take care.